Page setup can be found under the Layout tab. We're going to discuss page margins, text breaks, page size and orientation, how to use columns. We'll also look quickly at line numberings and hyphenation. Page setup is applied per section, so it can be the same for the whole document or different for each section. So let's first look at the breaks. If we click on the breaks drop-down, you'll notice we have two main types of breaks. We have page breaks and section breaks. Under the page break, we'll have a look at page and column breaks. Both the page and the column break breaks the text to either the next page or the next column. Any of the section breaks breaks the text but also starts a new section. So we can start a new section on the next page. We can start it right away without breaking to a new page. We can start it on the next even page or the next odd page. Breaking to even and odd pages becomes useful when printing to two sides and arranging in a book type format. So to get started, I'm going to insert a section break to the next page. Now let's look how to set our margins. There are a few different ways we can set our margins. I'll add some text so it's easy to see what's going on. The first and quickest way to set your margins is to do so using the rulers. If you don't already have your rulers turned on, click on View and check the ruler under the Show section. On your rulers, the gray section represents your margins. And if you hover over where the gray and white section meet until you get a two-sided arrow, you can just click and drag. If your left indents are set to 0, it's a little harder to find that spot. Same goes for top and bottom margins. If I change the view to multi-pages, it's easy to see the difference in our margins between these two pages. The next method is to use the drop-down menu under the Page Setup section of the Layout tab. If you click down on it, we have several different predefined. And you can click on any one of those to quickly set your margins. Again, if we view on two pages, we can see the difference. In addition to using the rulers to manually set our margins, we can also set them using the drop down and going down to Customize Margins. And then we can manually put in our top, left, bottom, and right. Notice that we have two additional settings. We have a gutter and a gutter position. The gutter represents the unusable space on a page taken up by the binding. It can be seen on the preview here. So if we add to the gutter and click OK, notice now that this left indent, notice that the left margin totals 1.5 inches. 1 inch is for the margin and 1/2 inch for the gutter. We have the option to put our gutter at the left or the top of our page. We'll see how the gutter becomes more useful when we look at setting up our pages to print double-sided in a book format. Let's look at how margins are handled when we have continuous section breaks. Let's turn back on paragraph markings. And we can see we have 3 sections on this page separated by continuous breaks. So if I click into any one of these and adjust the margins on the left and right, they're only modified for that section. What about the top and bottom margins? So if we go into the first section, the top margin acts exactly as expected, moving everything up and down. What happens if I select into the bottom? What if I select the next section and adjust the top margin? Then nothing happens. Same with the bottom section. Again, nothing happened. But if I extend this section to go on to the next page, it receives the top margin from the bottom section above here. Same goes for the bottom margin. So you can see this page down here got adjusted. So the left and right margins are adjusted per section as would be expected. The top and bottom margins of a page are adjusted with the section that starts the page. When it comes to page orientation, we have 2 options. We have portrait, which means the long edge of the page is vertical, and landscape, which means the long edge of the page is horizontal. Portrait will almost always be default. You can use the orientation button under the page setup section under the layout tab. If we scroll out, we can now see that the long edge for this section is now horizontal. And we can switch this section back to portrait the same way. Let's have a look at how to change our page size. So it can be found again under the page setup section of the layout tab. There's a drop down for size. It lists the most common ones first, letter and tabloid. Tabloid is basically 2 letter size pages put together. Legal size is the same width as a letter, but longer by 3 inches. Let's set that to landscape so you can easier see how it compares. So if we zoom to this level, you can see how this page is the double size of these pages. We can set custom size pages by going to the same point, clicking on size, going to more paper sizes. Again, we have more predefined options, but if we scroll down, we can go to custom size. If we want to get to all the settings that we've talked about in one place, we can all use the little pop-out button at the bottom right of the page setup section and use these tabs to find all of our settings that we've talked about. If you go to print and you scroll through the preview, any page you clicked on, you can get to most of those settings through the print menu. You can also get back to this menu with the page setup button in the print menu. We might want to format our page into columns. I'm going to set narrow margins here so it's a little easier to see what's going on. To format our section into columns, under the page setup and then columns, I'm just going to use 3 columns to demonstrate. So you can see that it's split this page up into 3 columns. I'm also just going to make this landscape to make it a little easier to see. We can see that by default it just fills up the first column before moving to the next column. But there's a good chance that you probably want it to use the columns up evenly. There's a few ways we can handle this. If we select a point and go under breaks, we can add a column break, which forces it into the next column after that point. We can do the same again, but that involves a lot of manual work that you probably don't want to do. And then your format might be messed up if you have to come back and modify any of the text anywhere here. The next way isn't ideal, but it's quite simple. You can just change the margin at the bottom of the page until it fills them up nicely. And if you go too far, it's going to force part of it onto the next page. So that's not ideal, especially if you want stuff on the rest of this page. The other method I'll show you, which is the one that I think is most ideal, is to use continuous section breaks to make part of a page into columns and other parts into a single column. Oops, so let's set the margins for this one back to narrow. So now if we go to the end of where we want things to be in columns, you can just select breaks, and under section break, select a continuous section break. And then we can set that back to 1 column. So note that if we wanted this heading to be above the columned portion, we can add another continuous break at the very beginning of what we want to be in columns. More options for columns can be found under the drop-down. Go under More Columns. You can add a line between the columns. We can make our columns different widths, and so on. We can number the lines in our document, and that's under the Page Setup portion of the Layout tab. Under line numbering, we have a few different options. If we select continuous, anywhere that lines are numbered, they'll just continue from the last number. We can restart on each page or on each section. There's also an option there to suppress for a current paragraph. Let's just turn on continuous for this section. And if you don't want your heading to be numbered, just click onto that and go to suppress for current paragraph. You can also do that for any paragraph in the middle. And so you can see it continues on to the next page. We can change that, however, to restart on each page. And we get another line number 1 on this page. If we change that to restart each section, you'll notice that it continues on from this page to here. But if we add a new section break, which could be either continuous or to a new page, we get a new line number 1. We can have a mix of continuous or restarting throughout our document. So because the last section was restarted, if we want to continue from that one, we'll have to change it for this one here. There's a few more options for line numbering. If we go down to line numbering options, then it brings us to this page that we've seen before. And then you'll have to click line numbers. We can set the number that it starts at. We can set it to count up by more than 1. And then we have the same restart and continuous options. Okay, and okay. So now we get line 10 to 15. If we change that to section, it won't number number 1. It'll just start on 5 and then go to 10. Hyphenation is when you let word break words in half to go across multiple lines, which in some cases can save white space on your page. So I'm just going to turn off the paragraph markings so that it's easier to see. So by default, hyphenation will be set to none. Let's set it to automatic. But if I add this word hyphenation, you can see that it automatically split to use up as much space on the page as possible. We set that back to none for a moment. And if we set it to manual, it asks us which words we want to hyphenate. So if I say yes, we might want to hyphenate yourself. I might not want to hyphenate keyword.